it's about 15% turnover of the CEOs globally, correct? Depending on the industry.
1 in 7 CEOs never get to celebrate the third year in a row in an organization.
And you could see that a lot of leadership now focusing on what is next quarter.
You are expected to deliver results from the day you are being appointed into the core office.
What's the healthy number of hours a day to work?
It's 35 times more complex to lead an organization today than it was 15 years ago.
Why is that? Why do we have so many CEOs changing? Hi guys, welcome to my new episode, Brands Through Stories. We are crossing 10,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, and this is absolutely unbelievable for me, because when I started this podcast, it was a therapeutical tool for me to get over losing my business partner, and now it turning out to be a real YouTube channel. So I'd like to thank you very much for subscribing to this channel, for leaving your comments, for giving us your like. We all very much appreciate it. Thank you. Today, my guest is Navid Nazemian. He is an executive transition coach with over 25 years of experience. Navid is the best-selling author of Mastering Executive Transitions book. He also was ranked as the #1 coach globally by CEO Today in 2022 and 2023. Navid has helped leaders at the top organizations like Coca-Cola, Shell, TikTok, and many, many others. Please, guys, welcome my guest today. Navid, thank you so much for joining, for finding time. I know everyone wants your time these days. You're #1 coach globally. So I really appreciate that you found time to join me on my podcast.
Thank you so much, Nina, for the warm introduction. I'm not sure my wife would agree with most of it, but the reality is I'm here, you're here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So let's start with one thing, because to be honest, before I met you, the idea of executive transition coach was something completely, I didn't know about it. I've only knew it once I met you, and of course read your amazing book. I really enjoyed it. I recommend it everyone to read it, especially those who are transitioning to a CEO position or a leadership position, or those who are looking for the CEO for their ventures. So a must read for you guys. But what is executive transition coach?
Yes. So first off, it's really not a new term, but it just so happens that coaches are very good in disguising what they actually do. So you would have seen me even 5 or 6 years ago on my business card to say I'm an executive coach. I know many amazing transition coaches who relate to themselves as being a leadership development coach.
Right.
So coaches are very good in coming up with new creative ways of describing what they do. But the term transition coaching is really unique in that it describes the process of either breaking into the C-suite as a leader, or if you're already at the C-suite, entering into a new position, sometimes in the same or in a new organization that is even more challenging, even more complex, and even more demanding from you. So what we do as transition coaches is to combine the best of both worlds. We apply elements of the first 90 days, the framework that I describe in my book, which is the Double Diamond Framework of Transitions. So very concrete tools and frameworks that help the leader to come to speed more quickly, to avoid the biggest mistakes and really transition successfully. And at the same time, some of the work that we do as transition coaches touches upon more the medium and long-term aspects of the coaching, such as leadership behavior change, such as building a wide network of key stakeholders and finding key messages and nurturing and nourishing those key stakeholders. So that's what we do as executive transition coaches.
I've also read, I think, the last chapter that when you transition out of the position, you also help. There was something I actually didn't think about, that when you transition out of your position, how that you probably need a coach also to do it correctly, right?
That is correct. And at the time I wrote the book and when I was doing the research for my book, the ratio of, if you were to go on Google, there was no ChatGPT at the time, and type in how to be most productive or successful during the first 90 days in a new role. At that time, you would get 1.x billion search results. And if you were to replace the word first with last, so how to be most
Yes.
productive or successful in your last 90 days in a role, you would get less than 50 million search results, which at the time meant that it was essentially an unexplored topic, which is why I was, feeling compelled to write the last chapter of the book on how you can transition most successfully out of a role, bearing in mind that that is one of the key things that will, help with your leadership brand and leadership legacy that you're leaving behind.
Beautiful. And I've never thought about it actually. And I've seen me as a strategist, as an outside consultant, I've seen CEOs coming and leaving. And in most of the cases, they leave and then people close the doors, blame them for everything that doesn't work well, right? And forget about them very quickly. I mean, of course, it's not in all the cases, but it's quite an often situation. So that period is super important, how you transition out.
Yes, indeed.
So I've read recent statistic that is about 15% turnover of the CEOs globally, correct? Depending on the industry. And you told me that it's even growing, the number.
Yes.
Why is that? Why do we have so many CEOs changing?
Yes. I guess it's there are many explanations for it. If I were to use a very personal example, my grandpa used to be the medical doctor of the train association. Now, he only did one job in his life and he retired. Now, it's unlikely if he were the same person and the same profession today, even if he were to be hired by a company that hires him as a doctor, it's unlikely that he will be only doing that role for the rest of his life. So there's something about the generational differences and the way we think about our careers. That's one of the key drivers. But I think the other key driver is something that's completely outside of the control of the CEO, which is, they have to deal with increasing demands coming their way through the board of directors, key stakeholders, investors, analysts, and so on and so forth, and sometimes even driven by their own ExCo members. So the fact that the tenure of a CEO is getting shorter and shorter, and this is a long-term trend. It's not something that only started on the back end of the pandemic or during the pandemic. It's actually been going on for 30 or 40 years. That means that 1 in 7 CEOs never get to celebrate the third year in a role in an organization.
1 in 10?
1 in 7.
In 7?
Yeah, never get to celebrate the third year in the same role in the same organization. So it's an increasingly shorter tenure and cycle for CEOs, which also means if that's what you're confronted with, you are less likely to think about what really the organization needs for the next 10 years. What really are some of the hard decisions you need to make this year, next year, and the year after in order to set the organization up for success. I'm not suggesting that's always the case, but I think there is definitely a temptation and directionally speaking, a short-term focus for CEOs in particular to focus more on the next quarter and the quarterly results than what is the right course of action for this company 5 years from now.
And I have to, from my experience, I can feel that. We usually get it to the project we start usually from the board, from the executive team, and you could see that a lot of leadership now focusing on what is next quarter. And what we do in the master vision is really a long-term view, and then only going from there back to the short-term goals. But that must have a huge impact on the company, right? And I don't remember the numbers in billions of how much money is actually spent on the transition, right?
I can tell you, I mean, the numbers are shocking. First off, the executive failure rate costs a company typically between 10 to 30 times the executive salary. Now, a normal attrition, let's say at a staff band level, costs the company usually 2.5 times the employee salary. So you can think of, a highly paid CEO of a publicly listed company, let's say in the UK, then you're looking at a number between £3 to £6 million. Well, that 10 to 30 times is the cost of the failure if they were not to be successful in the role. And oftentimes, the ripple effects aren't really factored in.
Yeah.
So let's say if you have a leader that is struggling at the very top, it's likely that they are not at the best of their abilities. It's likely that they are not transcending the energy and the commitment and the excitement that they're supposed to. It's likely that they will have disgruntled employees in the exco reporting into them, and eventually either deciding to leave the firm or to kind of be disengaged and really do the bare minimum. And so if you then start to look at that ripple effect, it's like throwing a stone into the water. You see how that eventually will reach the customers of that organization, how it will be reaching the call center agents that are taking customer calls, how will be reaching the retail store employees if this is a business that has employees working in outlets for them. So you can see how even the 10 to 30 times is a very conservative estimate compared to what it would be like if that same C-level leader or CEO would be supported by a transition coach.
Yeah. And imagine, they usually, I've noticed, come with their own team also, their own army. That straight away creates tension internally in the teams, right? So they place them everywhere and then they pack and leave.
Yes. I mean, this is a statistic from Russell Reynolds, and I
Yeah.
don't recall the exact number, but I think it's somewhere, the probability is somewhere around the 70 to 80%, that especially when you have a change at the very top in an organization, let's say the CEO role would be one of those, that they are likely to replace two or more of their inherited leadership team. So now that doesn't mean that it's always a bad thing to do. Actually, there's another study that I cite from Russell Reynolds Associates that suggests that if you're a newly appointed CEO and roughly 3 months into your appointment, you realize that there are one or two members in your inherited leadership team that don't have what you want them to carry out on your behalf. They don't have the power to translate the strategy into operational excellence or whatever it is. You're better advised to move fast and move quickly by replacing them, replenishing them, rather than give it another 3, 6, or 9 months, only to gather incremental data points to what you inherently knew to be through 3 to 4 months in. So there's also that angle we need to bear in mind, which is, if you have what I call the executive hunch, and 3 or 4 months into the role, you have severe doubts whether this one member here or that one member really has what you need them to be doing for your organization, you better move fast and move quickly.
Right. Tell me, please, then, let's go back to the reason 1 in 7 CEOs leaving in less than 3 years. What would be those main reasons? Are they mainly internal or external factors?
Yeah. Allow me just to lift this up to all executives.
Okay.
So including the CEO, CFO, CMO, CTO, and all C-suite executives, because the numbers are quite staggering. So the failure rate is roughly 40%. Right? Meaning that, if today there is a big announcement that so-and-so has started, as the new CEO of company, X or Y, that means that they have a 40% likelihood not to be in that same role 18 months into their appointment.
This is unbelievable.
It is. But there are 5 independent studies that all come to the same conclusion. The most validated one is from Heidrick & Struggles, one of the largest search firms in the world. And what they have done is they have placed over 20,000 executives over a 10-year time period. And when they went back and analyzed their own data to look at, what happened with those executives, they saw that roughly 18 months in, 40% of those executives either were pushed out, failed, or quit on their own. Now, that means that 4 out of 10 don't make it, which then begs the question as to how can this be?
How can this be?
How can this be? Because, I worked in the HR function for an incredible 20 years, and I had the fortune and the pleasure to work for some of the world's most admired companies. Now, I can tell you from an HR perspective how much energy, care, dedication, and detail goes into hiring at the very top of an organization. And despite all those efforts, despite selecting the candidates that not only look good on paper, but have been screened and interviewed by more than a handful of internal and external stakeholders, reference checked, background checked, sometimes supported by a psychometric or a diagnostic tool, 4 out of 10 don't make it, which was the whole reason why I felt compelled to write this book. Not only to look at what happens there, what are the top 10 reasons for failure, which is one of the chapters in my book, but actually find a framework and interventions, as I call them, 12 interventions I talk about in my book, that actually help those executives to have a high likelihood of succeeding, to reduce the risk of derailment, and to be able to hit the ground running and start to become productive roughly 50% more quickly than they would do on their own without any external support.
So what would be, I know it's at the beginning of your book, the 10 reasons, but what would be, let's talk maybe about 3 main reasons. What are those? Like one that is majority of people face.
Sure. I could actually do a whole podcast episode just on this one topic, because as you know, it's a full chapter in my book. But if I wanted to aggregate the key outcomes, and I do that often at conferences and keynotes, the top 3 group reasons for executive transition failure are people, culture, and politics. So it's
PCP.
So it's not like you go and hire a chief finance officer and he or she isn't really good with the numbers. It's highly unlikely that you are going and hiring a chief HR officer and he or she isn't really good with translating the strategic vision of the organization to the people agenda and delivering an operational plan on the back end of that. So it's not the technical or functional skills that is lacking or getting in the way. It's what we in HR call the soft skills that are so hard to learn and exhibit and embody.
What would be those skills? Of just
people,
that's not
people, culture, and politics.
Was that in your book? Those right. But
how do you become more effective in dealing with people?
Right.
Again, it's not some magic formula you need to apply. You just need to show vulnerability. You need to show higher levels of empathy. You need to show a great rapport with your people. You need to be able to relate to them, and likewise, like an infinity sign, they need to be able to relate back to you. You need to create a sense of followership, which is more than I'm your CEO, you're my CMO, I tell you to do this, please go ahead and do that. So that's not followership, that's command and control. And as we know, there's very little space left in the leadership world today to work like that. So it's all the soft stuff that's, or the lack of those, that's getting in the way, and not the technical or the functional competencies.
What about focus? I'll tell you from my experience, I've noticed now, I do a lot of workshop or interviews, for example, with the C-suite level. And I've noticed there's a lot of them they can't just sit still like that. It's all constant movements of, I don't know, the phone, the iPhone, Apple Watch, right? There's something. And even if they're talking, or even if their boss is talking, the rest are listening, they can't just sit still, relax, and focus. Is that something that's still now being evaluated by HR?
I'm not sure you would be able to evaluate a lot of that during the interview process, because there are ways you can come across as the most zen and serene individual for a short period of time, and may not be exactly like that later on in the work. What I would like to say to that is a few items, and you may remember when I speak about exponentially challenged leaders, you mentioned one of the statistics, which is the shorter tenure. I gave you another one, which is the 3 aggregated group reasons for failure. There are a few more items I would like to mention that speak to this. The first one is, and I use my own example. So when I was hired by this wonderful company called Adidas, or Adidas as we say in Europe, the group CEO had 6 direct reports, right? So he had a team of 6. The total ExCo is only a 7-member team. And those 6 people covered all the areas that they had to, so that he could do his job. In my last position, which was Vodafone, another wonderful organization that I was very proud to belong to for 8 years, the group CEO had 12 direct reports. Now, already you see how your time, attention, and energy will be divided not only into a much bigger number of people that, by the way, all want something from you, either your approval or your budget or your extra this or your extra that, and or that is also a reflection of the range of topics that you will be getting dragged down into.
Right.
That's one example.
Right.
The second example I want to use is the same, just on the KPIs, right? So when I was hired by Adidas in the year 2002, our group CEO had 7 key performance objectives, right? 7 KPIs. Of course, there was some subset of them, but that was what he had at the time. The same activity with the group CEO, who was sadly let go of at Vodafone about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now. He had 18 KPIs, and some of them had up to 8 sub KPIs attached to them. So again, it's all of that and more that's resulting in a much shorter tenure and in the 40% failure rate.
But what is the reason? Why is it increased exponential, the expectations?
So one of the studies I cite in my book is the complexity in organizations, right? Which has gone up 35 times in the last 15 years that the study was done.
Such a short period of time.
Over 15 years, it's 35 times more complex to lead an organization today than it was 15 years ago.
To be honest, I see from my friends who are at the senior positions and leadership position, you could see the stress. I think there's so much stress. I was thinking maybe it's Dubai and the weather. But
it is universally applicable. Now, there are helpful interventions. One of them is embedded in my Double Diamond framework, which is the work of Tony Schwartz on the Energy Project. But that's just one of the many things that executives can do to help with that. The other point I want to mention, because it's related to what we are discussing right now, is the fact that this is a study that was done by, I think, also a French professor. And what they got the executives to do is to rate their own stress levels during their normal time, if there is ever a normal time for an executive. And they were also rating the overall state of stress, meaning whatever is going on in their private life.
Right.
And, human beings being human beings, there are things that happen in our private lives that can have a knock-on effect on our roles, such as a divorce, a significant health issue, or things like that, dying parents, and so on. And so they were measuring kind of those stress levels, self-assessed by the executives, by the way, according to those BAU times, business as usual times. And then they did repeat the same study, the same executives, when they were going through a career transition.
Right.
And what they found out is that it is more stressful to go through a career transition than to be in your BAU and going through a divorce or a significant health challenge.
Really?
Right? Which again speaks to the idea that it takes a real toll on the executive during those transition times compared to the normal times, which are challenging enough, I guess, in any organization, really.
That's really interesting. That's why I think when I've seen there was a period here that a lot of MENA offices of big corporations, big companies were closing down and moving either to Saudi or maybe to Europe for the cost optimization. And all those people that have spent 20 years in the companies and more had to leave like either the country or just leave completely the companies. And the stress, it must be incredible, the stress they already had there and then leaving. Yeah, so, and I think it's more and more happening these days.
Yes. And it includes even being promoted to a new role, which is a very positive.
Which you wouldn't think,
which
right?
is a very positive
it's a celebration.
version of the same, right? But
right.
again, with new responsibility and new, level of promotion comes new expectations.
Yeah. So how then you've mentioned actually about the Harvard Business Review article. It was right, the
Yes,
article about the
yes.
research, which I've read in your book, and I'm going to look into that more because I'm on my journey now I was on the journey to find more time in my day because I thought that's what I need, an extra hour to be productive and effective. But what you mentioned in your book is not about the number of hours, it's actually the energy level that you have. Could you explain it a little bit?
Sure,
That's
sure. Very briefly, and it's important for me
yeah.
as a published author to mention that this is the amazing work of a guy called Tony Schwartz, who is based in the US. So I'm not claiming anything here. I just fell in love with this framework, and I felt that is a helpful framework to be embedded in my double diamond framework of transition. So essentially, what Tony Schwartz has done is to look at what is the executive's typical response to these heightened levels of stress, right? And the
Yeah.
typical response is what you just shared with me so kindly, right? I just need to carve out an additional hour in my day, right? And now I've seen that firsthand. I've been, working in many global head offices of some of the world's most admired companies. And whenever there was a new promotion going on, so someone just got appointed CFO, CHRO, CTO, and so on, I could literally see them camping in their corner office. So I would, I'm an early bird, I admit that. I would come to the office usually as one of the very first employees, but the lights were already on in their corner office. And at the end of the day, at the end of a very long day, when I wanted to kind of leave the office, the candle was still burning in their corner office. So that's a typical reflex, a typical response of any executive to say, I have to onboard myself. I have all these
Yeah.
suppliers. I have all these issues inherited from my predecessor. I have all these expectations dictated to me by my boss or the chair or whoever is my line manager. I've got all these things I need to learn about. I may be new to this industry. I may be new to this organization. I may be new to this company. So that is already a lot of stress. And guess what? Nobody is giving you a grace period of 100 or 120 days to say, okay, you know what, Nina, take your time, relax, chill out, be a fly on the wall. Nobody expects anything from you during the first 100 or 120 days. You are expected to deliver results from the day you are being appointed into the corner office, which then means, well, I just need more time. Now, the irony of that thinking is it's not a bad idea to be a lot more mindful about how you spend your time, but it's generally speaking not a great idea to make sure that you spend 18 or 20 hours in the office, or even if you're at home, you are doing work. Because at some point, when you hit that kind of minimum threshold of sleep, let's say 5 hours for most people that I know of, I need 7 hours of sleep to be most productive. 6 hours I can do, but if I have repeatedly 5 or 6 or less than that of sleep, I will become irritable and I will start to irritate the heck out of my own team and leader. So that's kind of my threshold personally. So when you start to, lower down your sleep patterns and give more and more time to your workday, guess what? Your stress levels are never going to rest. You will be deprived of the deep sleep that really is needed to reset everything in your brain and be sharp, focused, and at your best every day at work. And that will start to kind of play out to your disadvantage. So the revolutionary idea that Tony Schwartz had at the time was manage your energy, not your time. Because as you just said, the day has only got 24 hours for everyone. That includes Bill Gates, that includes Satya Nadella, that includes people like me and you. Now that means that rather than trying to carve out more time for work, we should actually be focusing on nourishing and nurturing our energy levels. And there's the 4 quadrants that Tony Schwartz has identified: the body, the soul, and so on and so forth, the spirit and the mind, that help you. If you were to attend to those 4 quadrants, you will have replenishment of your energy on a daily basis, rather than cutting down on your sleep, giving more hours to your day, and becoming irritable and essentially less and less focused. This is what you have observed, which is that stress level just never settles. And so it just needs to get out. And the way it gets out is it gets into our nervous system, and that's how we then start to demonstrate it.
This is really, and I've noticed it more and more with every year more and more from the clients, friends, and so on, and everyone is trying to work hard and super duper duper busy. We start working during weekends, right? We start working after working hours, and it's just taking Zoom calls while we're exercising. It's just like a hamster wheel of constantly trying to catch up with time. I have to say, I've read it, and I think it's an amazing concept, and I'm trying to implement it, but it's that pattern in your head. It's so hard to break.
It's counterintuitive,
Right.
It's the same. I was speaking to a client this morning, and we were talking about one of the four quadrants, the spirit, that is. And he and I got talking about meditation because he happens to be from India. And I just shared with him the however many thousands of hours I have clocked on my meditation app since the year 2014. So I was introduced to meditation as part of my coach training. I was a very strong skeptic of the idea to just sit still and do nothing, because to me at the time, this is how silly I was at the time thinking about it, was a waste of my time. In 20 minutes, I can at least get 20 or 30 emails done. In 20 minutes, I could do something more physically appealing, such as jumping on a cross trainer or doing a swim or something like that. Now, when I went through that trial phase and we had to meditate for 30 days only, obviously that was homework at the time. I never gave up my homework because I saw the benefits of being a daily meditator, and I've kept that practice 20 minutes a day, nothing more.
Only 20
Since
minutes?
then, only 20 minutes.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done. But you never skip it, right?
It's hard to do that because once it becomes your routine, it's like having breakfast or drinking water.
Right. Oh, I should go back to that also and
that's just one of the four quadrants. There are three other quadrants that we all need to nourish to a degree to be able to do our best work every day.
Right. And how many, just want to ask one more question on this, in terms of the number of hours, because when you're an entrepreneur, there's no one who'll check and say it's enough, right? There's no one who'll say, okay, you've achieved all your KPIs. It's good. Well done. There's never, you never get to the point that it's well done. What do you think the indicator, at least, what's the healthy number of hours a day to work?
Yeah. If you are in a relationship, ask your partner.
He's in the same dilemma. I think.
That may be not a good benchmark then, but generally speaking, our partners have a very good conscience on when it's enough for us to work. If they don't, we just need to pay attention to it, right? So this client of mine that I was speaking with is going through a significant transition as we speak, and he told me, and he has taken the Tony Schwartz HBR assessment. If you download the actual article, there's a quick and dirty assessment that you can do. Literally is, I think, 6 items per quadrant. So 24 questions is done in 10 minutes. And we were analyzing, the results that he has produced. And so, one of the items is, I get at least 6 or 7 hours of sleep every day. And when I wake up, I feel rested. And he had said, no, I don't feel like that.
Right.
And so I spoke to him to find out more as to what is it that is keeping you up at night. And of course, it's all of that, right? So if you feel you don't get enough sleep, without doing any deep analysis on that, when you wake up in the morning and you don't feel rested, that's a sign that your brain has been involved, engaged, worked through too much the prior day. Now, if you continue that repeated cycle of, engaging your brain, you may be even, this is what he told me, he lies in bed, eyes wide open. It's bedtime. He actually wants to sleep. But his brain just does not switch off, right? Because he's got all these thoughts in his mind. Now, I'm not a sleep doctor. I'm not an expert on this. What I do know is that is probably a good indicator that he's too committed, too much willing, too much in hustle mode in his current transition.
Yeah. I think I'm tired when I sleep even, not even when I get up. It's 7-8 hours, but I think it's so many roles that I have to play in my life with little kids
Yes.
and so on.
Yes.
So, and I'm sure with
Yes.
the executive also, when they have little kids, it must be
Mm-hmm.
a nightmare for them
Yes.
to.
Yes. Now, what I also want to mention here, and this is important, I spent 26 years working for large corporates.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to go for the top job, do not expect to be in the Zen state all the time, right? I'm not claiming that this is what is gonna come your way. You just need to get to the bliss moment, and then you're gonna be
Yeah,
bliss from there
there's
on.
no.
No, unless you're Dalai Lama or someone like that, right? But we are usually not in that same space, which means that if you go for the top job, whatever that top job is in your field of profession, expect to have more stress, less time for family, less time for relationships, less time for yourself. That's just the nature of the beast. So you need to be making those decisions quite consciously and mindfully as to what it actually means, other than the better pay and the bigger car and the nicer corner office and the whatever else you're going to get. More responsibility, more impact, potentially. It always comes with a downside.
I see some of the leaders now transitioning into being entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a couple of the interviews also, a couple of guests that on my show also. And I think some of them are not, I don't want to call naive, but they look at entrepreneurship as a freedom from all of that. But that it's another, from my side, I would say, I've been only entrepreneur all my life. I only had 2 years of corporate life, and I've realized this is not really my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as 20 years plus entrepreneur, there's no freedom, there's no bliss. There is no, I think it's only that 20 minutes when you can do the meditation. The rest is just constant stress. Sometimes it's positive stress.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of negative stress also. But it's non-stop. In terms of I want to go back. So I think this is amazing that we've discussed when it comes to our well-being. It's super important. If we go back to the role, so when you are joining as a CEO, let's say, and suite executive, the vision of the company. For me, as a person and the author of Master Vision, the vision of the company is vital for the company, is vital. So something that long-term, that dream, that company, that you want to lead company to. What I've noticed from my experience, I'm not talking about the companies like Coca-Cola, Vodafone, and so on. I'm talking about maybe medium to large companies. In most of the cases, vision is something that they write in the website. Sometimes they put it on the wall and they a little bit forget about it. And then it's all just how much money we make in the short term. So what's your experience with that, and how vision is important for you when you get to the new company?
Well, I think vision is of key importance for several reasons. One of them is, it's like, when I do the coaching with the executives and they are sponsored by the company, we have 3 extra sessions with the exec, plus the line manager, and optional also with the HR person. And so the very first session is to get meaningful input into the coaching outcomes.
Right.
So in a way, we co-create a vision for what is likely to happen 12 months down the line. I don't do 3 months engagements. I don't do 6 months engagements. I only work with my clients as a year-long, coach program. Now, that is, in a way, although we never call it that, the North Star, or the big, hairy, audacious goal, or something that is aspirational, right? That may or may not be achieved. Hopefully will be achieved or overachieved, but that's what we do at the outset of the engagement. And why is that so helpful? Because it really helps to focus my mind and the mind of my coachee to what are we working against? What are we trying to establish here? What is it that we try to achieve? And then we repeat the same halfway through the engagement, so roughly after 6 months. And we do have a final session. I got a client whose final 3-way conversation is coming up in November, in a month from now, where we then sit down and evaluate very honestly with the line manager and sometimes the HR partner as to were they able to achieve what we set out to achieve. Now, this is just a coaching example, but it speaks to the same thing, which is, essentially, if you wanted to look at it that way, if you have 20 sessions over the course of the next 12 months, all I do and the client does is to try to nudge them a little closer towards the desired outcomes, right? And in the same way, that's really crucial for even a small or medium-sized organization, because if you don't have a real compelling vision of what is it you want to achieve, it could be a 3-year thing, 5-year, 10-year. I've recently learned that one of the organizations I'm affiliated with has got a 100-year-old vision, right?
Oh, really?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, right.
Unbelievable, right? It's the advisory board center. Anyone can go and look it up on the portal. But coming back to where we are, I think that's really a helpful indicator to have around what is the North Star of this company. And then from there on, you can start to kind of dissect and distill, how do we want to make this work?
Yeah.
Whether you call them your leadership behaviors, you call them your corporate values, you call them your cultural beliefs. There are many different terms to describe the same. And that then can become hardwired into your organization, which means when you're interviewing candidates, you can benchmark against those, cultural beliefs or traits. When you're promoting your existing employees, you can use that criteria to say why so-and-so should be promoted and so-and-so should not. When it comes to paying out bonuses, you can, align that with the outcomes. And the outcomes are not just numbers, but the outcomes are, what is the degree to which Nina has demonstrated our company values? And so you can do so many things with it. It can be such a powerful beacon of light for the organization and the customers and stakeholders at the same time.
Beautiful. What about, and you've mentioned the culture now, culture of the company. Dubai and the UAE is a little bit of a transient place for a lot of people. It's very hard to build the culture in the company that you actually wish to build, because unfortunately people come and go, and some, I would say, from my experience, over 50% of people, their main goal here is to earn money. They leave their families to come here to earn money. So it's quite difficult to build it. Now, what's your experience with that? And you've mentioned that culture is one of the influencers, like why CEOs actually fail, though it's not a really nice word. Could you tell me a little bit more about culture and what you've noticed in this part of the world specifically?
Sure. So the example I want to use is when I was spoken to join this wonderful company called Vodafone. At that time, I was working for another organization called Roche, based out of Switzerland. I had no intention whatsoever to move jobs or do something else. And it just evolved around a conversation. Someone reached out to me who knew me and said, the group CHRO of Vodafone would like to have a conversation with you. I had led a project and I was told that he was interested to learn more about the project. Now, if you're not a group CHRO and another group CHRO wants to meet you for an exchange, you usually say yes to that, and that's what I did. Now, what I learned as part of my kind of conversation with the individual, this is Roland Skelligans and some of the HRLT members, was that at the time, Vodafone has had engagement scores globally. At that time, Vodafone had just about 100,000 employees in 24 markets that were higher than the engagement rates in Google, Apple, Microsoft, or Amazon. Adidas, I can include in there as well because I know those engagement rates. So that was my intrigue. That was my, oh my goodness. And I'm not sure if they planned it like that or they didn't, but that was my, oh my goodness, how can you, and when I say global average engagement scores means the total average of 101,000 employees, right? If that score for 10 years in a row has been higher than any other of the major players in the world, you gotta get a few things right to build that culture, to nourish it, to nurture it in the way that it just keeps giving. And I think the biggest test came when the pandemic happened. Obviously, I joined. and I was already in my second role and in London. And when the pandemic happened, we had one of those engagement surveys coming up, and nobody knew what's going to happen. Now, it's probably not surprising to hear that they dropped a little bit. But when I then started to reach out to all my peers working for some of the other most admired companies, I saw how their scores had plummeted as a result of the pandemic. So again, this is my best case example for, we used to call that in BAT a winning culture, a winning organization. And what we meant by that is you need to be winning in the marketplace. You need to also be winning inside the organization. You need to have a thriving culture that nourishes and nurtures and keeps the company alive. And those are two very, very solid examples of how culture can actually mean commercial outcomes, business benefits, and real hardcore numbers in the end.
So what do you think working in Vodafone, what did make that magic in their culture? What would be, we don't expect you to open all the industry secrets,
Yes.
but at least a little bit of.
You want to learn about my deepest secrets?
Yes,
sure.
deepest secret, please.
Sure. So I'm not claiming to have been in the lab and have seen the secret Coca-Cola formula in the safe, right? What I can say is what I think to be true from where I was at in the company. I worked for 3 years in the German business, which at the time was the largest opco in the world in Vodafone. So we had 13,000 employees. We had just over 10 billion euro revenue in Germany. And that was a big flagship. Today, Germany is even bigger than that because we did a few acquisitions on the back end of that. So I would say it comes down to three things for me. The first one was the degree of freedom or the level of autonomy that I faced in any of the two roles I did for the company. Now, I was the number 2 in HR in Germany, and I was the global head of HR in London, working my global role, supporting our group CFO, who, by the way, is a group CEO of the same company today, one of the only 3 women in the FTSE 100 that is a female CEO. And the 27,000 employees that reported up to her in the 24 markets. So that's kind of my benchmark data based on. I found that the degree of autonomy, flexibility, and freedom I had in any of those two roles was beyond imagination. It was much higher than in any of the other roles that I had held before in other companies. So that's I think, part of the success formula. The second part that I felt was really exciting was what I just mentioned to you, which is, you come to a cafe or you go to a team meeting, and there's something about the energy and the excitement, the buzz that lifts you up. And equally, you sometimes go with the highest level of motivation right after a meditation into a meeting, only to feel an hour later, walking out of that meeting room, that your energy is completely depleted and you have had some of the most horrible, horrendous conversations that really drag you down from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the ocean. So it was certainly that really helped me. And I think the third aspect that I want to mention is it wasn't only like, oh, you come and do what you think is right, which is the autonomy piece. But you still had to deliver. And by the way, you are working with some of the brightest and best leaders of any industry in that organization, right? And so that means there's something about, if you and I were to do this just on our own, and I have no idea if you're a runner or not, I'm not. No, I doubt, and I hope this is not, disagreed by you, that you and I would win the gold medal in any discipline at the Olympics. That's just my guess, right? Now imagine if you 10 years prior to today or me were becoming best friends with a team that is the best in the discipline, let's say running or rowing, canoeing or wrestling, whatever it is, how that will lift up our performance, right? Even though we may not have that as a target, to win the Olympic gold medal or to run a marathon or do something that is completely outside of our normal belief system. But just by being part of that crew
Absolutely.
and seeing the brilliance in action and having those uplifting conversations, seeing what amazing looks like, you will uplift your performance at the same time. And so for me, those were the three things that really made it worthwhile for me. And as a matter of fact, Vodafone is the company I spent the longest working for. I've never worked for a company longer than 6 years, and I stayed 8 years in that wonderful company.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think investing in people, finding the talents, bringing them, nurturing them is vital. It's so important for the company. And I hope one day this part of the world will also start using that simple secret to make their company stronger. One more thing I'd like to ask you, because I think this is something that a lot of us, not just the leaders, but entrepreneurs also are facing, is the world of opportunities. Especially here, right? The UAE is growing now, Saudi is growing, Qatar, it's everyone, the talents are here, business is here. There's so many opportunities around us. So, how to stay focused actually? How to get rid of this fear of losing the opportunities, of missing out, and stay focused on your long-term vision rather than the short-term, what would I call them, opportunities, or what would be another word for that? This kind of the attraction that, okay, maybe I need that, maybe I need that. How to really stay focused on that and with that confidence?
Yes. So, wow, that's a big question. So I can only relate to this through my own
Yes,
being.
yes.
And I've only been a solopreneur for 2 years. But what I can tell you, Nina, is that I actually find it doesn't come naturally to us
Uh-huh.
to focus on a main thing or a core thing, but actually that is the key to success, I find. Now I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. So recently I was approached by someone that I didn't know. So he's the executive vice president working for a shoe brand, and he reached out to me because someone had recommended me to him to check whether I would be happy to facilitate a half-a-day session. They were coming to Dubai as an exco. They're a globally dispersed exco. So they have people based in Switzerland, in Africa, and in the Middle East. And the whole team were coming together. They do that 4 times a year. And he asked me whether I would be happy to facilitate a half-a-day session for that team. And I listened. I didn't know what he wanted from me, so I listened to what he had to say. And then I told him that, listen, I understand now what you're looking to achieve. I know amazing coaches who would be brilliant at doing just that. But just so you know, I don't do that sort of work. And he said, oh, that's interesting. Is that the fee? Is that like the pay? Is that not good enough? And I said, no, it's actually quite generous. But I can tell you that whether it's me or any other coach for that matter, 2 days after that intervention, you won't even remember who was there and what happened in the room throughout a 3 to 4 hour session. What I actually work on is a leadership team journey that spans across 2 years. And I believe that you will find that to be much more meaningful and something that you will remember as a leadership team for years after the intervention has finished. Now, I referred him to a fellow coach. She took on the assignment. She was very happy because she loves doing that sort of a one-off type work. And now he and I and the CHRO are speaking about designing a leadership team journey for that entire exco over a 2-year time period. Now, you could say I was silly by not accepting that because that could have been a test for me and they get to learn about me and know me and so on. I get to know them. No, because if I'm not convinced that that intervention is meaningful and impactful, I might as well just let it pass. So it's the same with my coaching clients. 80% of the one-on-one work that I do is transition coaching. Now, I could do leadership development coaching. I could do executive presence coaching. I could do resilience coaching. I just choose not to do because people usually associate you with one thing that you're great at. And that will be my single most impactful advice to anyone that is a listener or a watcher of your podcast, to really define for themselves what is the one thing that really gets my excitement up every morning, that really pays for the bills and more, and really gets me to do my best work each time. And whatever that is, just stick with it. Speak about it, write about it, speak to your friends, speak to your family, speak to customers, speak to prospective customers. But that one thing is going to do more things for you than if you are going to chase all the shiny objects that are floating all around you, and you are going from this to this to this to this, eventually finding out that you're a jack of all trades and a master of none.
And the interesting thing is that my last question was, because a lot of people that I know from HR actually either know you personally or know of you, right? And my last question was, on behalf of the people I know, is how did you achieve in just a short period of 2 years such a strong personal brand? And I think you've just answered it, right? By being truly focused on doing one thing, but very, very well.
I think that's part of it. To be perfectly honest, 2 years ago when we came to Dubai as a family, I knew people because I used to live in Dubai only for 5 months back in the year 2007.
Right.
But at the time, there were no golden visas. There was no opportunity for you to stay here if you wanted to, even if your job moved on, which meant that I literally didn't know a single person when I came here. Now, you are probably right by saying that I probably have done a few things right. But the fact that is true is the focus on what is the one thing that people associate you with.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I've been in the rhythm, getting in the rhythm of doing it consistently, is do one post on LinkedIn every week.
Just one a week?
Just one a week.
Or
I don't do anything other than that. Now, some weeks, let's assume this podcast episode gets published a month or two from now.
Yeah.
And if I've already done my post for that week, I will do an additional one just to point to the fact that you and I had this wonderful conversation. But other than that, the rhythm and the cadence of what I do is once a week. Now, that once a week posting for just over 2 years now, 7 months ago, earned me the blue badge. And the blue badge is a big honor by LinkedIn, by the platform, because it's one that you cannot earn. It's the one that will be granted to you. So if I say Satya Nadella has a blue badge, Bill Gates has a blue badge, Barack Obama has a blue badge, Rishi Sunak has a blue badge. So these are people who I believe have a whole team of PR and communication experts to help them with their LinkedIn profile. I'm literally the person who does their own LinkedIn profile myself. And so it's really genuinely by providing value and writing about something that you feel passionate about. And over time, I guarantee that it's going to get you and anyone else who wants to put it into practice results.
Thank you very much. I think this is very insightful, beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me. I think I could sit for another 2 hours. I have so many questions. I think it was super engaging and the time went like this. So I hope we'll have another session also sometime in the future. And again, yes, thank you so much, Navid.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Take care.
So how was it? Good?
Fine. Yeah. You're very good.
You're very
You have
good.
a very natural way to
You are very
make it look like a conversation and not an interview. I've seen executive leaders who were, this is you.
Oh, can you put? I'm sorry.
I'm already on Don't Disturb.
It's the first. Sorry. So yeah. Sorry.
So
Uh-oh.